Welcome back to the second episode. So, like in the previous part, or else we are continuing this part. We discussed about the communication skills and the technical skills. What will you prefer between them? So that was discussed very much more in detail. You also gave some beautiful examples and also your experience in the field of communication. And one of your friend was very much good into software skills. So that part was very amazing. And now moving on to the next question, as Dev sir also said that we can discuss about one topic, which is about projects, how to build projects from the very basic level to a corporate level, because many engineering students and also after the graduation students struggle with the robotics projects and also some other technical projects, but especially talking about robotics. Sir, please guide us like how we can build our project and take it to the corporate level.
Yep. Sure. I'd love to talk about that. It's funny too, because I think back, when I was very young, got my first computer, you write your first, hello world program. You don't think about requirements for that, right? It's simple enough that you just you pop out some code and there you go. And then what can happen is that then you write some code that's maybe 10 lines longer and you still just kind of have it all in your head. And you begin to get yourself into a bad discipline where you just everything is just kind of in your imagination and you're not really formalizing any of that that you're working on in terms of defining it and giving it structure. And this is kind of funny when you think about it, because the whole point of code is a series of structured instructions to your computer, right?
Exactly,
So
yeah.
you should give yourself some instructions too. And this can be true for hardware as well. There have been a whole bunch of times when just, I'll go out to the garage and woodworking, I'll just cut something up, I'll, make a little project and it'll just pop over the weekend. And I never really sit there and think about it. So it's very easy to just ignore kind of that start of project process. And so I think it's really important, especially if you're a student and this is something you're taking seriously, to learn how that works, because one, I think it's actually going to help you become more successful with larger projects. But two, when you get into a corporate environment, especially if it's something regulated, even if it's just like a regular business, you are going to need to do some kind of structured project management or participate in project management. And so if you're so completely over here and you just do everything just out of your head, and meanwhile the rest of the business is running based on project management principles, it's going to really cause you problems. It's going to make it difficult for you to deal with the kind of a corporate environment. And honestly, it's eventually going to limit you, because it's going to prevent you from doing larger, more complex projects, because there is a point where your brain will explode and you just can't keep track of all the details, right? So if you're just at a student point, I think just some basic basic project requirements, just some basic techniques are really useful. Now, I'll give you some of the ideas that I've done in the past. Some of them are kind of low tech. So, I know there's people like, just to be honest, I still have notebooks. I still write things on paper. And I know there are people that look at me and they roll my eyes when they do that. I'm a nerd. I love my computers. I've got computers all over the house. It drives other people in the house nuts. But at the same time, there's something about paper that just I'm thinking about, oh, maybe I want to make this bold. And suddenly I'm thinking about styling text and changing prac. When I'm doing something on paper, even though the notebooks that I get are a little on the expensive side, just let yourself go, right? Rip the eraser off your pencil or use a pen or whatever, and just get everything out onto paper. Quick sidebar: if you ever do marketing copy, there's a famous guy in the history of marketing, David Ogilvy, and he used to torture copywriters by making them write 100, they call them tags or headlines, that sort of thing. And you'd write 100 tags.
Okay.
And the first probably 20 or 30 of them are absolutely horrible. But the point is to get those bad ideas out of your head. Just let them go. And if you're writing them in paper, then that's great, because who knows? It might actually be something that looks like a bad idea right now. And 3 months from now, after
Exactly.
you've worked everything, you might go back to your old notes and go, oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
already stumbled on this.
Right.
And I've done that a lot of times. So
Actually, I also can like relate to that because I have a habit to write the daily happenings in the night. Like I usually write that, and if I have a plan, I just write it down on the notebook. So,
yeah.
like for example, I have some goals that I want to define. So previously, I was not very much confident about it, but I just wrote
Mhm.
it. So it got pasted on my subconscious mind as well. So I started acting up to that level. So not I didn't achieve 100% of it, but at least 60 to 70% is also not bad, I think.
That's fantastic. And that's a great way to start. I've got on Amazon, I bought like a box of
Okay.
these little tiny notebooks. And so
Wow.
this actually fits in my pants pocket, and it comes with a pen, but it's kind of cheap, so the pen came off. But anyway, the point is that I've always got something that I can write on.
Mm,
So there's just no excuse. Another friend of mine, and I'll just give you one more quick example. Another friend of
yeah.
mine takes you can't see all the amazing stuff I have
Mm,
behind me blurred
yeah.
out. But
Actually, yeah.
another friend of mine takes a standard sheet of paper and he folds it, let's see, twice, 3 times. And so he has like these. And now it gives him little boxes for different subjects. And
Mm,
I've known this guy for like 30 years. And by the end of the day, this sheet of paper is completely full. And he uses each little kind of mini
mm,
rectangle as a kind of a subject area. And he takes notes on everything. I mean, it's hilarious. So there's definitely no excuse to not be able to just have something, write down, always capture your
exactly.
ideas,
Yeah.
never do what I do, which is think that you're going to remember it later. Because the
Right.
moment you say that in your head, you've already forgotten it. So just don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just don't do it. Okay. So
Yes.
so here's what I used to do at the start of a project. If you I don't know my books. There's a standard project management framework called PMP, I can't remember what it stands for, PMP. And it's good to at least go online, look at some YouTube videos, and just kind of learn the basics of PMP. You can actually get an international certification as a product management professional. That's what PMP stands
Mm,
for.
okay.
And and the standard is PMBOK. And
Okay.
it's a very formal framework. It's probably overkill for you just deciding what to do on your own, but it's a great career path. You could become extremely technical and then become a
Right.
project manager. You know where all those you know all those techniques. But let's back it up, because there was a time when PMBOK was just a very, very tiny set of specifications, and that's kind of when I got started. So the first thing you got to do is define what it is that you even want to do in the first place. Now, if
Mm,
it's just you, or if it's even just a small team, what I like to do is something that I used to call the post-it fling.
okay.
Um,
Like,
so
what is
we would
it?
take, I would give everybody on the team a pad of post-it notes, the little sticky notes,
Yeah.
and we would go into a conference room, and one of the conference room walls was always completely bare. And you would just write anything. So we kind of had a general idea, we're building a new, well, years ago, we wrote a web browser for AOL when the internet was just going public. And so we knew we wanted to we knew we wanted to write a web browser. It was for AOL. It had certain restrictions, and it was going after very, very basic users. And so we kind of had that understanding. So now we wanted to
Mm,
decide what did we want to go in there? How did we want to structure this? And so we would sit there and you would write one idea on a post-it and just slap it on the wall. One idea, bam, 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 and you didn't even think about formatting it. You didn't think about arranging it or organizing it all. Just idea, 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 idea. We'd end up
right.
with 100 post-its on the wall. And then usually me, but sometimes another an actual project manager would then go up and they would start looking at the different post-its, and they would find ones that were kind of related, and they would group those, and it starts taking shape. And now you suddenly start to see that you've got this basic framework. Oh my gosh, we've got this basic web browser, and it had 5 very distinct features. And it was, it was intended to run in a very specific environment. At the time, AOL actually didn't do native TCP/IP, so that affected things. And so all of this stuff, kind of went together. And in about 2 hours, we had a basic definition for what we saw. So we took that and we actually wrote that out into more of a paragraph form. And we sent that over to the people that we were working with over at AOL, and they looked at it and they came back and they said, we like this. How about this one idea? And they added something to it. So now you've got this sudden back and forth thing. That's a great way to get started right there. If that's all you do, you're already ahead of 80% of the people out there. It's just, that is a huge step forward compared to most people who just do it all based on their imagination and they keep it all up here. And, the moment they get confused or something like that, or gosh forbid they ever get hit by a bus, they lose it all, right? And so just having that basic framework, that's a great way to start. Now, where you can go from this more formally in a business, I would actually do that. In fact, I've done that with very large multi-billion-dollar businesses. And it's a great way to get started. It's a fun way to get started, because sometimes some people will write some really bad ideas up on the wall, and it's not about picking anybody. It's not about being mean, but sometimes somebody else would sit there and they would read this bad idea and go, wait, did you mean? And they would say something slightly different. They're like, yeah, that's what I meant. That's what I meant. And it just starts to move that creativity. So it's a great team building exercise, and it's just a great way to get all those ideas out of your head. Now, keep all those post-its, never throw them away. And
just we have to grab them.
Yeah, there's whiteboarding software. I mean, you can do this online. There's all kinds of ways you could do this. And so what I personally like to do next is, I'm a big fan of mind mapping. So,
right,
in fact,
me as well. Like, I also like it.
Oh, that's awesome. I've been doing mind maps I think I first learned how to do them in like the mid 1990s. I did a version of them that were called fish bones. The Japanese word is ishikawa, I believe. And so it was kind of diagonal on the page, and then you would draw out your branches that look like fish bones. And I actually still like that over kind of the more organic mind mapping, because I have to have a little bit of structure. So I like fishbone diagrams better than just kind of organic mind maps, but whatever works for you is fine. So I like to then take those big category ideas, put those as main branches on a mind map, and then start to develop them out and figure out what that really means. Some of your basic requirements could be partially hardware. They could also involve, if I'm going to do this with the hardware, I have to have control software that works this way. And I'm also going to be directing my system through some cloud software. So I also have to develop a second bit of software over here, right? And so you start to figure out where those dependencies are, and you realize that an individual basic requirement in corporate or in medtech, we might call that a user requirement, a USR. And so that one user requirement, the user can do this, right? The user can, remote operate a 9-DOF wristed end effector, right? That's what the user can do. That's your basic user requirement. Now, where does that go? That one user requirement could be 20 individual little requirements that you now need to trace and map out. So now in medtech, it's a little bit more formal, but that user requirement would become a series of distinct hardware requirements and software requirements and other things as well. And each of those elements should be written in such a way that you can validate whether it works or not. Sometimes that validation may only be qualitative. And if it's med tech, that usually annoys the FDA. You want to try to find some way to quantify it if you can, but think about it like hand controls for like cooperative control or telerobotics. It's kind of difficult to quantify if it feels natural when you're using like a remote control, right? That's kind of tough. So you've got to find some structured way to qualitatively evaluate whether or not the hand controls feel natural, right? That would be a requirement, for example, for surgery. A surgical robot, you would want a surgeon to feel like the robot hands feel as natural as them using their own hands, right? Quantifying that as a requirement is going to be really, really tough.
Right.
Figure it out if you can. But now you've got this idea. So now what you've got is, and this is also, you could call this a WBS, a work breakdown structure, because this is going to help you start to figure out how to schedule all this. Those individual user requirements could each have branched out into 100 traceable implementation requirements, right? And now in the English language, when we write out requirements, we tend to use two different words, or there's a couple words. The most commonly used word that for each of those requirements is, user shall, and then whatever the requirement is. And you use the word shall. And then sometimes it's kind of arbitrary, but it's just one of the reasons is shall is used. So you don't use shall very frequently in the English language, at least Westerners, right?
Okay.
So the great thing about using shall is if you then did like a grep on your whole user requirements document and you counted the number of shalls, it's probably going to give you the number of requirements in your document. So it's a great way to measure complexity, because shall, it's not going to occur anywhere else in the sentence. So it just makes it useful, right? So shall, usually every one of your requirements is going to be, user shall, sterilize the device, or user shall dispose of device after one use, all those kinds of things. User shall choose what color is available on their screen. User shall have a preference for colorblind color preferences, right? So you would then iterate through all those different requirements. And so this could be mechanics, this could be UX, this could be just under the hood software capabilities, but all those things would break down into a series of shalls. Now, once in a while, and every time I do this, somebody else on the team yells at me. But if there's something that's really, really, really important, like if this feature is not in the first release, there is no first release, right? And so when that happens, I will write must. So instead of shall, I use the word must. A lot of other project managers that I talk to, sometimes they like it, sometimes they just feel like there's a better way to do that. But I'll just throw that out there because it is something that I do. Now I do it very rarely. There's in any of the projects I've done, there's probably never been maybe more than 2 or 3 musts, right? But I make sure that everybody knows what those musts are. These musts will happen, or this release does not go out the door. And I make that very, very clear. The other things, if they're shalls, if the project was going late and you're deciding, do we need to extend the project and actually be late, or do we cut some features and release early? Well, where would you go? You would go to the shalls and decide if the shalls are something that you can cut back, but the musts are obviously ones that you already know you can't, right? So it helps. It helps. Now, this gives you traceability. So when you're defining all of those shalls, right, you're going to give them a number. And you could use there are tools out there that do that. I think Jira is the one that we were using most recently. It's a cloud-based software tool. There's probably good freeware ones out there as well, which would be a great video tutorial for you to do. But what you want is, you want to number each of those requirements. But here's the thing. If you just use like outline numbering in Microsoft Word, if you delete a requirement, you don't want to delete the number, because you might have other documents that refer to requirements. And if all of your numbering changes, it's pandemonium, right?
Yeah.
So the numbers for each requirements, if a requirement gets killed, the number has to be just eliminated, right? And so that way, all of your traceability references, so any CAD drawings that you do, you would then, this CAD drawing is based on user requirement, 1024, right? And then this software check-in is based on user requirement 2048. And so you would have that traceability backwards. And so every single feature you're implementing, you know where it comes from.
Right. Those are
And
connected, so it will be better to analyze.
Yeah. So that gives you really good structure for how to basically define your project and manage it. The other thing that you gain now is, because you have all of those broken down requirements, you now have the ability to start to schedule it, right? If you just took those 5 initial requirements, how long is that going to take? You have no idea, right?
Yeah.
But if you've got 100 requirements, nobody wants to do that amount of work. It's annoying. That's why there are people with jobs. If you don't want to be an accountant, you become a project manager. So that's your career path, right? So there are lots of people out there that love project management. I think it's a weird form of torture. And so, but it is a great skill. If you do find project management to be fun and you actually enjoy kind of working on all of those gears and managing the relationships to each other, it's a really solid career path. And it's something that you can always, I think, find a lot of joy in, because you're always in the middle of a project. You're always seeing what's going on. But that detail work sometimes just gets, my eyes glaze over and I'll just get really tired. But you now have, say it's 100 individual elements. Well, now I can start to go, okay, maybe it takes, let's just go real quick, right? I've got 100, let's say it takes 2 weeks to do each of those features. It's now 100 times 2. I now know how long it's going to take. I've got a 2-year project, right? Okay, 2 years. That's way too long. That's ridiculous. So now we start to look at individual ones and you go, okay, this one is actually 2 days worth of work. And so you start to adjust. And now, just from a very simple cascading process, you've got this ability to really now build a basic structure. Okay, this feature can't be implemented until this feature is done. So Gantt charts, which are even worse in terms of being boring, Gantt charts will help you show relationship. So you could have something that has a dependency. This task has to be done, and then this task can start, right? And so you create those relationships in your Gantt chart, and now you've got this ability to see, these things now are starting to spread out. And then you can then also say, okay, what if I double the size of my team? There are a lot of people out there who just think, if I hire twice as many people, I can do anything twice as fast. But that's not always true, because you may find that some of your projects have dependencies that I've got too many things that have to finish before the next things can start. And there's only so many people that can work on these individual tasks. And so when you start to break all these down, you go, you know what? This project is a 6-person project. And if it was 12, I don't know where they would work, right? So that helps you, because that means you're not going to hire too many people, which is obviously an expense issue, right? Too many people, you're spending a lot of money on salaries for people who aren't working. But also, if you have too many people, it creates more confusion. Now you've got management confusion, and what are you supposed to be working on? Well, you're not working on anything because you're waiting on this guy, and it just starts creating tension and all that. So now you have that ability to go, okay, here's how many people I have. I now know that a 6-person team, and instead of 2 years, it's going to take 4 months. Okay, now where are my big risky items? And maybe for those high risk areas, I go, wow, if this thing goes too long, and that's called your critical path in a Gantt chart. If this part goes too long, the whole project is late. And yet, these other 5 branches on the Gantt chart, if those go up to 2 weeks late each, it has no effect on the release of the product. And so you want to be able, so now you can start to determine those. This gets really great. This is actually where project management can be fun, because you can start to see that kind of stuff and you can see those relationships. And then obviously you want to have good communication. It's a really tough thing. I know people hate meetings, but you want to have a meeting that's just long enough to make sure that people know what each other's doing. I do a Tuesday meeting for the entire company, and I will start the meeting and I will usually go through like all the status items that everybody's turned in. So we use a cloud-based tool called Confluence, which is really great. Although these days I might use Notion, maybe Obsidian. I mean, there's a lot of really cool online collaborative tools like that that are kind of like
Notion is good.
They're kind of like wikis, sort of. I do like Notion. I use Notion for myself, but I built an entire surgical robot completely around Confluence. There was, I've told people, I've said, the data in Confluence is probably almost as important as the actual design and documentation for the hardware and software, because there was just so much information. Anytime we would learn something, we would document it, and you would find those things in Confluence. So they're not formally part of the project, but they really, they're like the Rosetta Stone, right? It's just, if you have access to that Confluence data, man, it just tells you everything. So every one of those weekly meetings, we would all contribute to one document in Confluence, and we would put all of our status items in there. I would then go into it and I would pick out what seemed like to be the 3 probably most important things going on that week. And I would copy those and put those at top. So I would talk about those items just to make sure that everybody in the company understood these are probably the 3 most important things we're working on this week, right? So everybody understands it. It just helps in that communication. And then people would then go through, and if they hit an item where they're like, I don't know how to do this thing, or I'm waiting on information from a vendor, I need something paid for, I need a new software license before I can do this. It's like, well, at least you're creating that opportunity for them to tell you, right? So you're creating an opportunity for communication. You're creating an opportunity for just making sure people are on the same page. And that's, I try to get that meeting done in 1 hour, and that's the only all hands meeting I have, because nobody wants more meetings than necessary, right? But at least you have that, and you've got a framework, and so you know what you're working on, you know what's on deck, and you know what's coming up, right? And so all those issues can get resolved. You kind of go through it, but then you also have documentation. So a new person joins the team, they go in and to Confluence or Notion or wherever, and they're searching for keywords. They're finding old information from other team members. And they're able to catch up, and they're able to learn about what's going on. So it is good for everybody. So having a little bit of structure in your communications and team management and team communication is an essential part of all of this project management. But it all begins with something as simple as just capturing your ideas and deciding what you want to do. Now, bonus, it's also useful to decide what you don't want to do. Now, that might sound a little funny, so I'll give you an example. With my previous surgical robot, it was based on a Delta architecture.
Okay.
And part of the reason for that was, there were a couple reasons. Part of the reason was a PhD student actually did his dissertation on stiffness and hysteresis characteristics for a serial arm versus a delta for high precision motion, right? So we were making a cooperatively controlled robot for microsurgery. So we were following a person's hand that was holding the instrument, and the robot had to follow it, but the precision had to be through the roof. And it also had to be very stiff, because you could be potentially using this robot for eye surgery. And if you've got a stiffness problem, or you've got a little bit of rocking and for hysteresis, and you're doing that with a needle in somebody's eye, that's a bad time, right?
Exactly.
So at the time, the PhD candidate had determined that there really weren't any good solutions for serial arm joints that provided the same level of stiffness and low hysteresis compared to a Delta robot for roughly the same cost. You know, there are Delta robot. I mean, there are serial arm robots out there that will not move under any circumstances. I mean, there could be an earthquake, you could have kids riding on top of the thing, and it's not going to shake. But what does that cost, right? That could be a very expensive robot. And if I can build the same robot and get high precision and high stiffness for like $50,000 with a Delta, but it cost me $500,000 to do it with a serial arm, that's why we chose the Delta, right? So that was a requirement. So we knew before any new mechanical engineers came in and said, "Why aren't you guys using a serial arm?" We're like, okay, we know what we're doing, and it's based in this architecture, and we're not doing this with a serial arm, and we already know why. We already have those reasons. We've already reasoned through that. Now, funny enough, 15 years later, I don't think the decision is as easy anymore. There are new serial arm robots out there like KUKA, and then there's another one that name just zipped out of my head. There are some really nice benchtop serial arm robots that can actually do cooperative control, and their precision characteristics and their stiffness is just amazing to me. Those didn't exist 15 years ago, right? So 15 years later, I might look at that. I'm doing it this way, and I'm not doing this. 15 years later, that decision might change. And I think that's pretty cool. I just want to throw out another example. Surgical navigation, right? 25 years ago, I can't remember when it first started. You had those little retroreflective balls, and you would have a big camera in the OR, and it was actually watching a constellation of 5 retroreflective balls, and you attach that to like the patient's bone, and that causes a small injury to their bone because it's a pin that you're driving into their femur or whatever, right? So there's a downside there. But this was the state-of-the-art technology, right? And so if you wanted to do surgical navigation for, any kind of bone surgery, spine fusion, knees, hips, that sort of thing, you had to use those retroreflective balls. And you had to have a big camera that was about 8 feet in the air so that nobody stood in front of it. And it was constantly monitoring those balls. You had to drive the ball into the patient's anatomy. And then you had to, touch a bunch of fiducials and register the 3D model to the patient anatomy and all that. That was about an extra 20 minutes of time while the patient is already under anesthesia. This is not a good time to be wasting. This is not a good opportunity to be spending 20 minutes of time to set up a robot, right? But that was the state of the art. Today, I have seen experiments where looking through a set of webcams, right? So literally went to Target, bought a couple of Microsoft webcams, ripped the plastic housing off of them, and then just 3D printed a mounting for the 2 CCDs, put them on there. And so now we had dual optics for $50. So that was pretty cool. Okay. And doing that, we visually, in no retroreflective balls, visually, we looked at the patient bone. We formed a 3D point cloud, And we then found the match of that 3D point cloud to the 3D CT scan from the patient.
Mm.
And it was done in less than 30 seconds automatically on a student's laptop.
Okay. Less than 30 seconds. That's really fast.
That kind of registration speed blew my mind, and it was all automatic. Nobody was touching fiducials, no retroreflective balls. Now, there might be some patient settings where you can't see well enough, or the patient anatomy is covered with, fat or goo or whatever. It may not always work, but in certain settings, that's a perfect solution. And 25 years ago, that would have been science fiction. So 25 years ago, you would have said, if you're doing surgical navigation, that whole branch is now based on little retroreflective balls. I got to go to NDI in Canada or Atraxis, and I have to buy one of their monitoring cameras. I mean, like that was just the way it worked. And if I had even thought of like, well, can I just do this through a standard, like a webcam or something like that? The answer would be no. 25 years later, the answer is, well, yeah, actually you can. And it turns out that you might even be able to do these point clouds with only one single source of vision. You don't even need stereo vision. And it gets a little complicated, but it can be done. And there's actually papers published out there showing how you can actually do accurate point clouds. You only have to jiggle the camera a little bit, and you can get a 3D view effectively and build a point cloud of what you can see. In fact, I mean, there's apps for the iPhone that do that, where you're walking around and it's building a point cloud to do like automatic blueprints and things like that. So we know it can be done. You just have to have a little bit of motion, and that's fine. So, keeping track of the things you decided not to do can be as useful as keeping track of obviously the requirements and the things that you are going to do. So, like when you go all the way back to that Post-it portion, don't throw anything away, right? Really keep track of not only what you decided to do, but what you decided not to do, because it could be very informative later on. It could be another product. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Like the idea that like won't work now may work in the future. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Actually, that was a great explanation. Actually, I will suggest you guys to work upon this practically, because whenever we think of any idea, we are not able to get it done. We will think about like we will do it tomorrow, we will do it later, or on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, but it is not possible to work upon it. So writing down things make it possible. Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly. Right. Because many of the technical guys don't focus upon this particular skill. I have observed many of the people, they think that working upon the technical part is only important, but writing down things can make a little change in the personality and also in the work as well. Yeah,
it's very helpful, and I think it also helps you change the way you see the project. Just from like an education standpoint, even if you want to be a science nerd your entire life, learning history, learning English, learning some of those other subjects that might not be directly related to what you truly love, they help you see the world in new ways. And even if you don't want to be a project manager, and I don't blame you if you don't, understanding how a project manager does their job can help you do your job, but it can also help you be effective as part of a larger team.
Yeah.
And unless you're planning on working in a cave and being all by yourself, if you want to get a job and you're planning to be part of a team and making money as part of somebody else's company, well, you kind of need to learn how to work with project managers. So the sooner you can kind of learn at least basic disciplines, I think the better.